My name is Alice, and this is a story that, to this day, I hesitate to tell. Not because I lacked the courage, but because part of me still wonders how it got here. That summer, I never imagined my life would take such an unexpected turn, and it all began in an innocent, almost trivial way. My routine was defined by silence. My husband, Thomas, spent more time at the office than at home, and when we were together, the void between us felt louder than any conversation. Our interactions were limited to formal questions and mechanical answers, as if we had both accepted that the passion that once united us was now just a distant memory. It was within this context that my brother and his wife asked me for a simple favor to look after Ethan, my 18-year-old nephew, while they went on a short trip. I agreed without hesitation. Ethan had always been polite, intelligent, and above all, responsible. He brought a sense of freshness to the house, filling the empty spaces with his youthful energy and lively conversations. At that moment, I didn't realize that his presence would become the catalyst for something that would change my life. The first day was uneventful. We watched movies, laughed at silly jokes, and everything seemed perfectly normal. On the second day, however, the tone of our time together shifted subtly but irreversibly. That morning, Ethan decided to go out to meet some friends. Leaving me alone at home, I felt a selfish sense of relief. Savoring the rare opportunity for solitude, I took the time to relax, disconnect from the world, and for a few hours, lose myself in my thoughts. The tranquility was abruptly interrupted. The door creaked open unexpectedly, and there was Ethan, standing in the doorway, looking directly at me. "Alice, I forgot my keys," he said, but his gaze conveyed something more, something I couldn't decipher. For a few moments, silence prevailed, and the air in the room felt thick with tension I couldn't explain. I quickly composed myself, trying to hide my discomfort. "You should have knocked," I said, my voice trembling more than I would have liked. Ethan averted his gaze, a noticeable blush spreading across his face. "Sorry, I didn't think," he replied, his expression a mix of embarrassment and something I couldn't quite grasp. I tried to dismiss the incident and change the subject, but Ethan remained there in the doorway, motionless, as if hesitant to leave or say something more. "Is everything okay?" I asked, attempting to sound casual. He took a deep breath, as though gathering the courage to speak, and answered, "Alice, I heard something about you today, something that worried me. I thought I should come straight home." My expression of curiosity quickly turned to concern. "About me? What is it?" I asked, my voice now serious. He hesitated, pulling his phone out of his pocket. "I don't know if I should show you this, but I heard some friends talking. I don't know who did it, but someone recorded something that might be bad for you." My heart raced. What was he talking about? A video of me? What kind of recording could this be? I tried to stay calm. "Ethan, I need you to tell me exactly what you're talking about," I insisted. Feeling a knot form in my stomach, he avoided my gaze, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe it's better if you don't see it," he said, holding his phone as if it contained a bomb ready to explode. But I needed to know. The idea of something about me circulating without my consent was unbearable. "Show me," I demanded, my voice firmer than I thought I could manage. When Ethan finally showed me the screen, the video wasn't playing, but the mere thumbnail image was enough to leave me stunned. It was a recording of me, apparently taken without my knowledge, but I had no idea where or by whom. My hands trembled. "This is serious, Alice," he said, his voice low. "If someone's trying to hurt you, we need to do something." The weight of the situation hit me like a punch. I felt vulnerable, exposed, and Ethan's genuine concern only made it harder to bear. "Don't tell anyone, at least not for now," I asked, trying to maintain control. "I'll figure this out, but I need time to think." He nodded, but there was something deeper in his gaze. It wasn't just worry, it was care, not the distant, cold care I knew so well from Thomas, but something more sincere, closer. I didn't know what to think, but I knew somehow that this conversation would mark the beginning of something I didn't yet understand. That night, alone in my room, the events of the day swirled in my mind. The video, Ethan's expression, the words we left unspoken. What was happening? What did it mean? There were no answers, only questions and an unsettling feeling that the lines between right and wrong were beginning to blur. The next day started like any other, but nothing felt quite the same. Ethan acted normally, but there was a palpable tension between us, as if what had happened the day before lingered like a shadow over every interaction. While preparing breakfast, I noticed him watching me, not in an invasive way, but attentively, as though he was trying to understand something he couldn't yet articulate. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice calm and almost cautious. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, and you?" He shrugged, averting his gaze. "I had trouble. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened yesterday." My breath caught for a moment, but I forced myself to keep my tone casual. "You don't need to worry, Ethan. I'll handle it." It was the response I hoped would be enough to close the subject, but his gaze, filled with something I still couldn't define, remained fixed on me. We spent most of the day doing separate activities. He read on the living room couch while I organized some drawers in my bedroom, desperately trying to occupy my mind with anything other than a video or Ethan. But even alone, my thoughts kept drifting back to the way he had spoken to me the night before, that genuine concern, the way he seemed far more mature than someone his age should be. In the middle of the afternoon, while I was washing dishes, Ethan appeared in the kitchen. "Can I help you?" he asked. I hesitated for a moment before agreeing. He stepped closer, and for a moment, the silence between us felt comfortable, but then he broke it. "Alice, can I ask you something?" My stomach turned. "Sure," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "Are you okay, really?" His tone was so genuine it caught me off guard. There was something in his sincerity that cut through my defenses. "I feel like you carry a lot on your own," he continued, his voice low. "And well, I know I'm just a kid from your perspective, but you can talk to me, you know." I looked at him, and for a moment the words escaped me. There was something so honest about the way he cared that, for the first time in a long time, I felt like letting my guard down. But how could I? How could I share my fears and vulnerabilities with someone so young? Someone just beginning to understand the world. "Thank you, Ethan. That's kind of you, but I'm fine," I lied, avoiding his gaze to escape the weight of his attention. He didn't push further, but I could sense the disappointment in his expression. Yet there was something else, a quiet determination, as though he knew my denial was just a mask. That night, as the house was wrapped in silence, I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. My heart raced. "Come in," I said, my voice shakier than I'd have liked. Ethan entered, looking nervous. "Sorry to bother you, but I need to talk to you." I nodded, gesturing for him to sit in the armchair by the bed. He hesitated before speaking. "Alice, I know this might be wrong, but I have to say it. You're the most incredible person I've ever met. I can't get you out of my head since always." I was paralyzed. His words struck like lightning, illuminating something I had tried to ignore, the intensity of the bond that was beginning to form between us. My heart raced, and for a moment, all I could do was stare at him, trying to process what I had just heard. "Ethan," I began, my voice faltering. This is complicated. I'm your aunt. We can't yet." "I know," he interrupted, his tone firm. "I know it seems wrong, but I can't help it. I see how lonely you are, how he doesn't appreciate you, and I want you to know that I care about you more than I should." Maybe, but it's true. My chest tightened. There was something devastatingly pure in the way he spoke, as though he was laying his entire heart bare in front of me. And yet, I knew what he was saying was dangerous, a treacherous path that could destroy us both. "Ethan, I don't know what to say," I admitted finally. "You're amazing, but this can't happen. It's not right." He nodded, but his eyes didn't lose their hopeful glimmer. "I understand, Alice. I just wanted you to know how I feel." When he left the room, leaving me alone once again, a whirlwind of emotions swept through me. Shame, confusion, but also an unexpected warmth, a feeling of being seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. The weight of loneliness I had carried for so long felt lighter, though for reasons I didn't want to admit. That night, as sleep eluded me, I replayed every word, every look, every moment. I knew I needed to put an end to this before it was too late, but how when my own heart seemed increasingly inclined to believe in Ethan's words. The next morning, when I saw him in the kitchen, his eyes met mine, and for a moment it felt like the world around us had disappeared. Something was changing, something neither of us could control. The following days unfolded like a precarious balancing act. Ethan maintained a respectful distance, yet his presence filled the space in ways I couldn't ignore. Every glance, every casual interaction seemed to carry an unspoken meaning, a silent conversation that words could never convey. That morning, as we sat down for breakfast, he started talking about something trivial, a movie he had watched the night before. It was an obvious attempt to break the tension, but instead, it only seemed to amplify it. I tried to act as if nothing was wrong, but my heart betrayed my facade of indifference, counting harder every time he spoke to me. Later, while I was washing dishes, I heard footsteps approaching. Ethan stopped beside me, his shirt sleeves rolled up, ready to help. "You don't have to, I've got it," I murmured, but he smiled and grabbed a plate. "I'm not going to let you do everything by yourself," he said lightly. It was a simple statement, but it carried something deeper. For years, I had done everything alone, literally and emotionally. Ethan's gesture, small as it was, illuminated a part of me I had tried to keep dark, the desire to be cared for. We worked side by side in silence, and his proximity was almost suffocating. The fresh scent of his soap, the warmth of his body close to mine. I hated the effect it had on me, but it was impossible to ignore. When we finished, Ethan dried his hands and turned to me. "Alice," he began hesitantly, "I want to thank you for everything. I know I don't say it enough, but you've always been amazing to me, even when I didn't deserve it." "You don't need to thank me, Ethan," I replied, avoiding his gaze. "It's the least I could do." He laughed softly, a sound tinged with melancholy. "You always downplay everything, but you do so much more than you realize." Before I could respond, he tilted his head, his eyes fixed on mine. "You deserve so much more than you have." Those words caught me off guard. For as much as Thomas and I were stuck in a lifeless marriage, I had never let anyone verbalize the truth I avoided confronting. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice weak, "don't say things like that. It's not appropriate." He stepped back, his expression a mixture of frustration and hurt. "Why is it so hard for you to accept that you deserve to be happy?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I'm not the right person to say this, but someone needed to." I had no answer. The silence between us seemed to pulse, heavy with everything I couldn't admit to him or to myself. Ethan finally shook his head and left the kitchen, leaving me alone, staring at the sink as if it held the answers I don't have. That evening, as I read on the couch, I heard a soft knock on the living room door. Ethan entered, carrying a blanket. "It's getting cold," he said, draping it over my shoulders before sitting in the armchair beside me. We didn't exchange many words, but his presence was comforting. A quiet companionship that filled the emptiness of the house. After a few minutes, he spoke. "Alice, can I ask you something?" I nodded, not looking up from my book. "Are you happy with him, with Thomas?" My heart raced. It wasn't a question I expected, but the answer had been lodged in my throat for years. I don't know," I admitted finally. "I think happiness is a complicated word." "It shouldn't be," he said, his eyes intense as they met mine. "Happiness should be simple, being with someone who makes you feel alive, who understands you." I closed the book, unable to keep pretending we weren't having this conversation. "Ethan, what do you want from me?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He didn't hesitate. "I want you to see that you deserve more, that you can be truly happy without settling for less." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, the intensity of his gaze holding me in place. "I know I'm not what you expected, but you're everything I never knew I needed." The confession struck like thunder. My mind screamed that this was wrong, but my heart was lost in a whirlwind of emotions I could barely identify. I stood abruptly. "This can't happen, Ethan. You're too young, and I'm married. This can't be." He stood too, but he didn't step closer. "I know," he said quietly, "but that doesn't change how I feel. I just wanted you to know." I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, leaving him alone in the living room. I closed the door and sat on the bed, my heart still racing. Ethan's words echoed in my mind, challenging everything I thought I knew about myself. He was wrong, of course. This was impossible. But then, why couldn't I push him away completely? In the middle of the night, lying in the dark, I realized my internal struggle wasn't just about Ethan's feelings. It was about what he had awakened in me, the need to be seen, valued, desired. Thomas hadn't looked at me that way in years, and I couldn't remember the last time I allowed myself to feel something so intense. When morning came, I resolved to set clear boundaries. I had to do this for myself, for Ethan, and for both of our sakes. But when I went downstairs and saw him in the kitchen, his easy smile and casual greeting, I knew it won't be as simple as I hoped. The days that followed were a dangerous game of dance between what was right and what felt inevitable. I tried to keep my distance, erecting invisible barriers, but the truth was that each barrier was a futile attempt to deny what was happening inside me. Ethan filled the spaces with a presence I didn't know how to push away, and slowly, what had begun as silent tension was evolving into something deeper, something overwhelming. That evening, Thomas was out, as usual. The house felt larger, emptier, the silence almost suffocating. I was curled up on the couch under a blanket when Ethan came down the stairs. He hesitated at the entrance, as if deciding whether or not to come in. When he finally approached, there was something different in his eyes, a determination that made me hold my breath. "Alice," he began, sitting in the armchair across from me, "I need to talk to you." His tone was firm, but there was a vulnerability underneath that made it impossible to ignore. "Ethan, please," I interrupted, already knowing where this was heading, but he raised a hand, silently asking me to let him continue. "No, listen to me. I've tried to ignore this. I've tried to give you space, but I can't keep pretending that what I feel doesn't exist. I see you, Alice. I see the incredible woman you are, and I know you feel it too." I opened my mouth to protest, to deny it, but no words came out. He was right, and I hated how true it was. For years, I had convinced myself that my desires, my needs didn't matter, that my role was to endure, to keep up appearances, to be the perfect wife to a husband who barely noticed I existed. But Ethan had shattered that illusion. "This is wrong," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "Do you know that, Ethan? We can't." He stood, closing the small distance between us until he was only a few steps away. "Why not?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "Because of what people would think? Because it's easier to ignore what we feel than to admit that maybe, just maybe, this is what we both need?" I was trembling, and it wasn't from the cold. His proximity was overwhelming, and every word he said seemed to strip away another layer of my defenses. "Ethan, you're so young. You don't understand what you're asking. I understand more than you think," he said, kneeling in front of me. He took my hands, his eyes locked onto mine. "I know what I want. I know you deserve more than what you have. And I know that no matter how much you try to hide it, you feel this too." There was a long silence, heavy with everything left unsaid. My hands trembled in his, and I could feel my heart pounding like a drum. "This will destroy us," I murmured, my voice barely audible. "Or it could save us," he countered, with a conviction that left me speechless. Then, without waiting for permission, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a gesture so soft, so hesitant, that it left me frozen. For a moment, I stayed still, my mind screaming at me to pull away, to push him back, but my body had other ideas. Before I could stop myself, I gave in. My lips met his in a kiss that started tentative but quickly became something deeper, more urgent. It was as if years of repression, of buried desires, were pouring out all at once. His hand slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and I let myself get lost in the moment, forgetting all the reasons this was wrong. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathless. "This can't continue," I said, my voice betraying the resolve I was trying to muster. But Ethan only smiled, a soft, understanding smile. "I know," he said, though the glimmer in his eyes told a different story. "But that doesn't change how I feel." He stood, helping me to my feet. "I don't expect anything from you, Alice," he said, his voice gentler now. "I just want you to know that I'm here. That I'll always be here if you need me." I nodded, unable to speak. He squeezed my hand one last time before heading upstairs, leaving me alone with my thoughts. At that moment, I knew I had crossed a line from which there was no return. Something between us had shifted, something that couldn't be undone. And as I sat in the silent living room, the taste of his lips still lingering on mine, a part of me knew this was only the beginning. The days following the kiss were marked by an uneasy silence, not because we were avoiding each other, but because we both knew something irrevocable had happened. Every shared glance, every accidental touch carried a weight of meaning, as if the space between us had become an electric field of tension. Ethan respected my silence, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't ignore, a mix of patience and determination, as if he were willing to wait as long as it took. I, on the other hand, felt trapped in an emotional whirlwind. Part of me knew I needed to end this before it was too late. but another part I was afraid to acknowledge alone for more. That Friday, Thomas left for another work trip. As usual, he said goodbye with a quick kiss on my forehead and a generic comment about calling later. I watched as he walked out the door, feeling the familiar emptiness that always followed his absence. But this time, there was something different, the awareness that I wouldn't be entirely alone. Ethan appeared in the living room shortly after, his gaze seeking mine as if he already knew what I was thinking. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice calm and full of concern. "Yes, of course," I lied, forcing a smile. He frowned, clearly unconvinced but didn't push. Later, while I was preparing dinner, I heard his footsteps behind me. I turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "Can I help?" he asked, as he had so many times before. This time, though, there was something in his tone that made my heart race. "It's fine, Ethan. I can handle it," I replied, trying to sound firmer than I felt. He stepped forward, the kitchen suddenly feeling smaller with his proximity. "Alice," he began, his voice low, "can we talk?" I knew what he meant. I knew that sooner or later we would have to confront what was happening between us. I sighed, setting the knife down on the cutting board. "About what?" I asked, feigning ignorance. He took another step closer, now so near that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "About us," he said plainly. "About what happened, about what's happening." I looked at him, my mind scrambling for words that could end this conversation before it went too far. But no words came, only silence. He took another step until we were face to face. "Alice," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I know you feel it too." I should have stopped him then. I should have told him he was wrong, that none of this made sense. But instead, I felt my defenses crumble. My body responded before my mind could intervene. And before I knew it, my lips were on his again. This time, the kiss wasn't hesitant. It was urgent, filled with everything we had been holding back. His hands gripped my waist, pulling me closer, and I let myself lose control, if only for that moment when we finally pulled apart. We were both breathless, our eyes locking in a silence that spoke volumes. "This can't continue," I murmured, even though I knew the words were hollow. He ran a hand through his hair, his face a mixture of frustration and desire. "Why not?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You deserve to be happy, Alice. You deserve to be loved." Tears stung my eyes. "Ethan, this isn't about what I deserve. It's about what's right. And this is wrong." He shook his head, stepping back. "I don't see it that way," he said firmly. "But if that's how you feel, I'll respect it." I nodded, my mind still spinning. "Thank you," I whispered, though a part of me wished he had fought harder. That should have been the end of it. But as night fell and the house sank into silence, I found myself in the living room. Unable to sleep, Ethan was sitting on the couch, a book in hand, but he looked up the moment he saw me. "Can't sleep?" he asked, closing the book. I shook my head. "No." He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Do you want to talk?" I sat down beside him, keeping a safe distance, but as the conversation unfolded, the distance between us gradually disappeared. We talked about everything and nothing, our words flowing as if they were an extension of the comfortable silence between us. When the conversation finally faded, our eyes met, and I knew I was about to cross the line again. "Ethan," I began, but he cut me off, placing a finger gently on my lips. "Don't say anything," he whispered, and once again I gave in. In that moment, all the doubts, fears, and consequences vanished. There was only the two of us, lost in something that felt stronger than any rule or morality. And for the first time in years, I felt alive.